I got to pay these guys this amount. I see this amount in rehabs. Yeah. And I'll tell them my goal is to make $40,000 on your house. We talked it through and he's like, that's fine. I understand you need to make what you need to make. And you didn't get me in this situation. I did. But I told him, I was like, hey, my goal is to make $40,000 on this. If I make more, I'm going to send you extra, because I realized like I didn't earn this equity. You did. I didn't put a down payment in there. You did. And I said that on every sale that I talk with sellers on that I can think of. And, my goal is to make this a win-win scenario.
Hey friends, welcome back. This is the Evergreen Marketing Podcast by Care.com, where we help you get leads, close deals, and build a business of freedom and impact. I've got a new friend on the podcast today, Seth. Seth, welcome to the podcast, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Brady.
Absolutely. That's good to hear. And I'm so glad you're pumped to hop on and have this conversation with me. Friends, we're doing something a little bit different today. About a year and a half or 2 years ago, I was sitting down at a dinner table with a couple Carrot team members and a couple investors in Phoenix, Arizona. And we're just kind of brainstorming over food and drink. And I was telling them one of the things I've always wrestled with and kind of wondered, just curious, and not being an active real estate investor myself, is this idea of motivated sellers when they're in a hard spot. They've got their head in the sand. You hear investors say this all the time. They got their head in their sand. They're not thinking straight. They're not thinking clearly. They're not making sound decisions. And I've always been really curious about that and a little bit struggled with it. And so anyways, about a year and a half ago, I had this idea. I was like, guys, what if I could convince it? I wanted to make a piece of content. I'm the content marketer. I'm like, let's make a really interesting video. So where I'm getting at is I have an offer for anyone listening. I have an invitation for anyone listening that wants to take me up on this idea, in addition to Seth. But I had the idea to say, what if you went to the seller after the fact? Let's say 2-3 months later, and you ask them, do you feel like you made a sound decision? Do you feel like that was the right decision for selling your house at a discount? Do you feel like that was good? And got their thoughts on it. And just out of curiosity, I know it's going to vary on a case by case basis, but I just kind of wanted to run that experiment, make some content on it because I think it'd be really interesting, and pair that with the thing of giving back some of the profits to them for two parts. One, just because I think it's really awesome to give back. It does something awesome for the person giving the money, and obviously for the person receiving the money. But two, I want to know, like, does the seller care how much you make? If you make a bunch of money on it, is that going to rub them the wrong way? Are they going to be totally fine with it? I'm just really curious how that would play out. Just scratching the curiosity itch, if you will. So anyways, I still love to run with that idea. If anybody wants to do this with me and take me up on this crazy harebrained offer, shoot me an email, brady@carrot.com, and let's make a video together and do some more stuff like this just because it's interesting. And I want to elevate transparency in the industry. But anyways, Seth, the reason I brought you on is because you email me and you have a story like this, which I'm not going to spoil it. I'll let you share it. But I'm really excited to talk with you, with our audience, because I really like the way you do business. You do it differently. You do it transparently. You have a heart for giving back. And I think there's some really cool things you do as an investor that other investors can learn from, even if they don't run their business exactly like you. So want to talk about that story, obviously, maybe talk a little bit about your negotiation process, how you're transparent with sellers, and what your journey as an investor have been like, from going to teacher full-time, dabbling in investing, and now being a full-time investor. So yeah, you got a cool story, man. I want to unpack it. So I'm going to shut up. I'll stop yapping. But yeah, tell me, let's skip the background for now, at least, but tell me about this story, the whole reason why we're on this podcast, man. What happened?
Yeah, well, so I really the reason is I took some action. It was only a couple podcasts ago with Daniel Cabrera. You had this shout out like, "Hey, if I know he's done this, go ahead and email me." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, I'll do that." So I shot you an email. But the story that came to my mind was, when I was first kind of doing more investing, I hired a pay-per-click campaign leader, and I just hopped on with Carrot maybe about 3 or 4 months prior to that. And I had this seller contact me, and it's a bit of a drive out of Denver in this town called Bennett.
mm,
and he was out there. It's like 45 minutes east of Denver. Um, but I went to go walk the house, and yeah, it was pretty trashed. Like holes in the walls. It's
mm.
just destroyed. Hoarder house. The cat food all over the place. There was an
Yeah.
entire room. Yeah.
Was it
Oh,
wet cat food or dry cat food?
dry. He was like
Okay,
vacuuming it
okay.
up when I showed up. I felt bad for the guy. I was like, this doesn't touch it. But he had, like fish tanks that were full of mold, and a whole cat room was just full of
Ooh.
cat crap. Like,
Oh,
or
man, that's rough.
yeah. So it was, not a fun situation for him to be living in.
Mm,
And I recognize that right off the bat. Like, oh man, there's something going on that's bigger here. Then I just need to sell my house. So we started talking. And honestly, I didn't think much of it, and I just learned a little bit about sub twos, and
mm,
so I started talking to him and giving him like numbers that I had. I was like, man, there's no way I can give you more than essentially what you owe on this house right now. Would you be okay if I took over your loan, which is a sub two?
yeah.
Um, and he was like, yeah, I just need to move back to where my folks are, and so that was his game plan. And honestly, I felt kind of bad because at the closing table, like it seemed to be like a win for him. But at the closing table, I essentially stopped by an ATM and I got him like $300 so he could get gas money to get out to his parents' place.
Mm,
Um, and it struck me at that point. I was like, I think my goal here is to make about $40,000, which I had told him, and that's part of the thing I do when I meet with the seller is I try to tell them like, hey, here's the numbers. And I'll tell them my numbers straight up. Like I'm planning on selling this house for X amount. I got to pay these guys this amount. I see this amount in rehabs. Yeah, all the stuff on the spreadsheets that we use or whatever you're using to calculate those costs.
yeah.
And I'll tell them my goal is to make $30,000 or whatever it is. In this case, it was my goal is to make $40,000 on your house. And we talked it through, and he's like, "That's fine. I understand. You need to make what you need to make, and you didn't get me in this situation. I did." Um, yeah,
Hmm,
that whole thing, which was very transparent with him as well, and just kind of owning his own space, um, and what situation he was in.
yeah.
But I told him, I was like, "Hey, my goal is to make $40,000 on this. If I make more, I'm going to send you extra because I realized like I didn't earn this equity. You did. I didn't put a down payment in there. You did." And I said that on every sale that I talk with sellers on that I could think of that,
Hmm.
my goal is to make this a win-win scenario.
Did
Uh,
you learn that from anyone, or is this just something you just felt like doing?
yeah, no, it was honestly just something I kind of stumbled into. Um, you know, I try to put myself into their shoes is probably where it came from. Of
Hmm,
like, how would I want to be treated if this was my house and I was just in a crummy situation and didn't know how to get out of it?
yeah,
Um, I'd like the buyer to treat me right.
yeah,
Oftentimes they'll use the analogy of like, hey, I'm gonna treat you in this sale like I would treat family members who I care about, right? Like I gotta clarify that because
right, right.
some people are like, oh, don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, not your family.
uh,
So, a lot of empathy, making
yeah,
no assumptions, giving them the benefit of the doubt. That's
sure.
cool.
Well,
So, you told me you'd give more if you made more than 40.
well, which, honestly, as a teacher, and I was doing both at the same time. So as a teacher, like, yeah, my salary at that time was maybe 70,000 for the year. And so for me to make 40, I'm like, that's insane, numbers to me, right? Like, it's like, that'd be
Yeah.
amazing. That'd be like a half my
Over
salary
half your yeah,
bonus. Like,
yeah.
so for me, I was like, this is fantastic. And if I make extra, you know, more power to it, I'll send it on to them. Um, so yeah, at the end of the sale, he had obviously in closing, he had to give like his forwarding information. And I had also had his phone number in contact so that I could get a hold of him. But after the sale that I had done after the flip, I mean, everything looked great. We ended up making over 40. And so I hit him up. I was like, hey, is it okay if I send you some extra money? And he's like, well, yeah, of course. He totally didn't expect that. He's like, there's no way you're doing this. I'll see it when it's in the mail kind of thing. And so I sent him a check for $4,000 after the sale, which
Hmm,
he was like, dude, this is crazy. I can't believe you did that. And then on top of that, in the sub two, the contract was written that I was supposed to be able to also keep whatever was in escrow. But he had like $1,900 in escrow, so then I also forwarded him that check. So at the end of the day, he was like an extra like
6
$6,000,
gr yeah.
pretty close to it. So that to me is just really, it was a feel good moment of like, I can make money, but also so can this person. And yes, you were in a crummy situation, but I have two options here. I can be the guy who takes advantage of that situation and makes even more money, or I can be the guy who did what I did and is like, you know what? I recognize that I need to make some money, but I also recognize I didn't build this equity and you're in a crummy situation. Yes, I'd love to help. And here's another way I can help.
Mm.
So
And it truly is a win-win. I mean, you walked out
yeah,
with the 40, or I guess, minus the 4 or minus escrow, but still you walked out with a pretty good chunk of change. You got a sub to it, take over the mortgage, and then, yeah, he's getting his bonus. Um,
yeah.
have you done this with any other, situations, any other deals where it's like give money back to them afterwards?
I haven't done where I send money, but I've sent some like family things, the heirlooms, things that we got left behind. They didn't realize, like, you collect somebody's house and they just are like, I'm out. I've found birth certificates, I found social security cards, licenses,
Holy
like,
cow.
just really
Yeah.
important documents, and then, family photos, heirlooms, things like that. And I'm like, I'll just shoot a picture of it and be like, hey, do you want this? This looks important. After we did doing while we were doing clear out. Um, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe we left that. Like, yes, please, could you send that to us?" I had this one lady; she got a package in the mail after we had closed on her house, and she was like, did this package arrive? It's really important." So I was like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." So I just forwarded that. Um, just being aware of like, there's more to this than just, yeah, I paid my money, and yeah, sorry you were in that situation. Thanks for the money. That's a lot of, unfortunately, what I see is a lot of investors' approaches of like, it's my end dollar that I got to make, and there's very little concern for the person that you're interacting with.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you're treating people through this whole process. One of the things that you had mentioned in your notes before we recorded the podcast was how you try to give back a portion. I think it was 10% or so of your money to certain
Yeah,
nonprofits. I think you'd mentioned something about basic human needs. Um, I love this conversation because our whole goal is to help people build businesses of freedom and impact. You transition from a full time job to a little more time freedom. It seems like, and you're really building business impact. You can empower other people. I feel like a lot of people, myself included, at times you want to give more, but you want the give to be perfect or creative, or you want it to like stretch the furthest. Because if it's a stretch for you to give it, you want to make sure that it really hits. How do you simplify giving? And yeah, how do you simplify giving?
yeah, that's a great question, right? Because there is that need that's, if I could give everything I have and I still won't fill that need, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
The wealthiest person could do the same thing, and there's still going to be that need. Um, so obviously, there's at some point you got to figure out what's that number that works for you, that you feel good about, and that also makes sense and is helpful. Um, for us, it's my wife and I essentially, we kind of tag team these, but we'll give 10% to International Justice Mission, which is like a trafficking freedom kind of
Mm,
thing.
yeah.
So for us, like that 10% feels good. And then, she's also an agent, so she'll give 10% to somebody else that she wants to do from her commissions. So
Mm,
there's various ways that we give to essentially kind of hit that number, if you will, of like, to me, 10% is pretty easy to find and give in
yeah.
general. Um, so yeah, just coming across a number that works for you. And I would challenge anybody listening to this, like, how much are you really giving? If you ask your CPA, like, what does your tax document really look like? And you're giving,
Mhm.
if it's not 10%, like, yeah, I challenge you to try to make it that way. Like that's not actually a whole lot when you start kind of funneling things towards
Yeah.
other bigger picture items, if you will. But
Have you guys bounced back and forth between like, oh, do I give this money to the local community? Do I invest it back locally because I'm an investor, or just Or is it simple and you have so much buy-in into this one organization? Like, I know I have organizations where, like, I love doing business with them. I donate to them regularly. I'm not really looking for new ones because, other people can donate to what resonates with them or where they see the biggest need. But yeah, do you bounce back and forth between, like, local or some of the broader organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we get mailers in the mail. As soon as you donate anywhere, you get a bunch of mailers of like, "Hey, donate to here, donate to there,"
Yeah.
right? So we'll send extra to those places as like um, a one-time gift or something like that.
Mhm.
We, but in general, it's not as consistent, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that does make sense, man. Um, so I love sharing that story. Again, if anyone else has a story like this, shoot me an email, brady@carrot.com. I'd love to highlight you and talk, at least talk more about this and learn your story. But Seth, let's talk a little bit about I want to talk a little bit about your negotiation process and transparency. And then I want to talk about your journey as a teacher, some of your mindset shifts you've gone through recently, you mentioned,
Yeah.
before we wrap it up. But the negotiation process, you're I don't even want to call it a negotiation because the way you talk with sellers is just different. It seems very relaxed. It's definitely not cutthroat. It's a little bit slower paced and open. You ask good questions. What's your negotiation process look like? What's it look like talking to sellers?
It's probably different than most. My end goal is to solve a problem, right? So if I approach it in that manner, like I'm here to help solve your situation in a way that, yes, I can meet my needs in this process, but I'm also meeting your needs in this process. And so when I approach sellers in that manner, automatically opens the door for, all kinds of different options to happen. But
Yeah.
but really breaks down that distance thing.
What was before we hit record? We were talking about it. I can't remember what it was, but there's something you said you acknowledge when you're on the phone with them.
Yeah.
What was that? Explain that to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I will always acknowledge with the seller is when I'm on the phone or in person, just I want to acknowledge the situation that they're in. Um, a lot of times I get a call of, "Hey, so and so just died. We got to sell their house." Like, "Oh, great, let me help you out." No, like my first inclination is like, "Man, I am so sorry for your loss," and that just really puts you guys in a crummy position. Like this is not fun. And nobody ever calls me because they're excited to call Seth and talk about selling their house, right? Nobody ever calls a We Buy Houses company because they're like, yes, this is awesome. Uh,
Yeah.
they're in a bad situation. So my goal is to always like at least empathize with that situation and
Mm,
recognize like, there's something bigger going on in their world than just a cash transaction. And
mhm.
I feel like a lot of times it can get lost, especially after repetitions of sales and acquisitions and all these things we go through as investors. There's this element that can be lost of like, hey, there's another person at the end of that phone line,
Yeah.
and this is going to affect their family or their kids or whoever. It's going to affect somebody else other than yourself, and just really being cognizant of what can I say and do that can help them. And I've had sellers where my competitors have them under contract and I meet with them and they know that they're just trying to get a second opinion really if they've called me, and building that rapport and just having them be like, wow, this guy, you're way different than these other guys who, they just threw a number at me and now they're trying to chop that number down and now they're trying to tell me that,
Mm,
it doesn't meet their budget. And I will be very transparent with sellers. So like, hey, here's my offer and here's why. So I'm going to buy your house for this much, but I'm going to sell it for this much. And in Denver, this area, I generally need about 100,000 to 120 using hard money lenders to make a break even essentially, right? So
mhm.
I'll tell them straightforward, like, here's why it's at least $100,000 less than what you're thinking. And then I'll give them like, hey, my breakdown is this much is going to cost for repairs on this place, and then I do need to make some profit. And I'll tell them like, hey, I'm looking to make about $30,000 on this house sale. Just so it's very transparent, right? That's
Mhm.
my goal is to just if everybody's on board with that, and at the closing table, people are like giving me hugs and crying and like just excited. Like, right? Sorry, I'm getting
Yeah,
emotional
yeah,
because of some of the ones I've been through. It's just like they are
yeah,
so excited that I'm helping them out. And they just recognize like there's a human element that has happened within this transaction that could have very well been just dumped down to numbers and me making my profit and move on from there and go get the next one and maybe brag on Facebook about how much I made, whatever. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
which is unfortunate that we see these things. That it's great
yeah.
that you made money, but I don't necessarily want to see like some kind of. So it comes across as you're taking advantage of people more than it
Mhm,
is. Look at how awesome you did, in my opinion, anyway. And I never want to come across as that guy. Um, One of the first deals that I did, the first flip I ever did, I bought from a wholesaler,
mm,
uh, who I'm going to remain nameless at this point because he's
yeah,
still doing stuff. But uh, I didn't know anything. I was a teacher. I was going to try to do this on the side, and at the end of the day, he had promised, like, yeah, I'm going to help you find these contractors. I'm going to help you with this and that and that. After we closed, he got his money. Dude ghosted me, no contact, and I was like, well, what do I do? Like, so I learned very quickly, like,
sheesh.
oh, okay, got to try to call these guys, these guys, try to figure it all out, and basically had to GC the thing myself entirely, which I'm very handy, so it's okay. But it was like a very frustrating situation, and
That's rough.
even being a buyer in that situation, it just gave me one of those moments of like, if I felt like that, how did the seller feel like that, right? In
Yeah,
that other end of things, like, do you feel like that as a seller after you've sold it to Seth or you've sold it to Brady or whoever, right? After you sold your house, do you feel like, yeah, that was a great decision, kind of like you talked about earlier, or like, man, that guy was awesome. Thank you for doing that. I can't believe they stepped in that way. Or, what are they saying about you after you've completed the transaction? And maybe it's nothing, right?
mm,
Maybe it's I'm glad that's over with. And that's
yeah,
fine too. But at the same time, yeah, I'd like to believe that there's some more impact I can have. And,
mm,
to kind of tie this back into teaching, like, I was a middle school teacher for 10 years, which is everybody's favorite years, right? Is middle school.
yeah. Oh, yeah, wonderful times. Yeah,
Great times, yeah.
yeah,
So I've had you would have students come back and be like, "Man, Mr. Rao, you were such an impact to me, and you're the reason that I do XYZ." Or you said this one thing that I still think about, and it really affected me in a positive way. Thank you so much. And middle school is a hard time in your life, and I just really appreciate that. And so I took that mindset and wanted to bring it into the realm of investing, of like,
mm,
can I do that on it's not as big a scale, right? I'm not seeing 200 people a day like I did with middle
mhm,
schoolers, but can I have that same effect with what I'm doing wherever I'm
yeah.
at?
But it's also it's a deeper impact because it's one to one instead of one to many. You have a
Yeah.
direct influence in the seller's life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it's a very unique situation we can have is, I can make 100 grand on this property, or I can make 50
mm,
and give 50 to the person who built that equity and actually poured their hearts into this house or into this place or whatever it is, or their family is like, there's, this legacy they were trying to keep. Um, like, how can I give back? I actually have a deal right now that I'm working on in Colorado Springs where this lady hit me up and she was like, this is the first place I ever had. And now I have all these lawyers because she tried to file a lawsuit. I have all these lawyers' bills because she didn't win the case. And it's like $80,000. And all she has is the equity in
oof,
this place. And so, I'm really trying to rack my brain like, yeah, I can go buy it for cash for like the numbers to me make sense at 170. But, like I came back to her, I was like, what do you need out of this house? Like, what's your main goal? Like, how much money do you need out of this? And she came back with like, really, if you could just give me enough to pay this. And I was like, okay, let's see, that would put me at 220. That's a $50,000 difference, right?
mhm, yeah,
So, yeah, in my head, I run the numbers, and like that the spread's just not there. But I told her, you know what? Yeah, I think I can do that. And that
Mm.
to me, I'll still make money on it, right? I'm not gonna lose money. It's not a I can't be a charity at the same time. But to me, I'm like, this is another way, like you're talking about giving. Like I'm gonna give to this one individual in a different way, right? It can be kind of nuanced there, but
How do you fight that internal struggle, like that voice inside your head that's like, "Well, Seth, you could just make more money on this. Like, you don't have to do this for the person." Um, how do you reconcile that?
yeah,
Like you said, it can't be a charity, but you know,
it is hard. And then, there are other justifications where like, oh yeah, but if you made 50 grand more, you could give away 20 to something else.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
sure. But, to me, it's the battle in my mind is like, eh, I'm in this scenario because of this individual. And if I can give them back something that I didn't earn this equity, I did nothing for this equity. And this lady poured her whole first 5 years in this house. And even had you look it up. I tried to do a sub two on it so that I could then like just hold it for her essentially, and then give it back to her. Was really my main goal. But she has like an assisted down payment that locks it up, so I can't do that. Um, but that is something that's always challenging on the back of my mind. Of like, how can I actually give more than what I need out of this?
mm,
And yeah, I don't know. There's something to me about if I give back, things will come to me eventually. Like I'm not hurting for money. I'm not hurting for food. I have a place over my head. Like I heard this recently. Somebody said, if you have food and shelter, everything else is abundance,
mhm.
right? And that
Everything else is bonus. Yeah,
everything else is abundance, right? And we just have this very me mentality, and more is better. And
yeah,
yes, it's helpful to have like a safety net and be wise with your finances, but
yeah,
for me, it's like okay, I at the end of the day, like this isn't a make or break in my life. If I don't get this deal, I just move on to the next one. But if they don't get what they need out of this place, their life is significantly impacted to the point of like, she's like, I'm looking at bankruptcy filing. And to me, I'm like, that's if I can save you from that situation in your life, that's something that actually doesn't really take much away from me to do because I'm going to have
yeah.
more deals. Like there's more options out there.
Right.
Uh,
It's an abundance mindset, as some people call
absolutely.
it. There's
Absolutely.
more deals out there. Well, one thing you said that I want to highlight, man, is I think is a pivotal thing you said is I'm paraphrasing, but the seller gave you that opportunity. Like you didn't earn that equity.
Mhm.
The seller came to you. And I think that's one thing I'd love to see it's easy for me to say. I'm not an active investor, but I'd love to see it elevated as the seller earned that equity. They're bringing that opportunity to you, and I feel like sometimes we can see other people as like, oh, well, they did this to themselves, like they earned the situation they're in,
Yeah.
and there's not empathy there. And maybe sometimes maybe they did make some really terrible decisions, and they got themselves into that scenario. But do they deserve to not walk away with any of their equity? I don't know. I don't think so. I think maybe lend some grace and empathy, and that's just kind of my aim is what I want to elevate. So I appreciate you sharing that. That's really cool. One other question I want to ask you on the. Oh, sorry. Do you have something to say on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just in complete agreement with that. Like
Yeah.
there is something to say that eh, I again, I didn't build any equity in that. I didn't put anything into that deal other than running some numbers to try to buy it, right? and,
Yeah.
and maybe some, but and then there's a mentality out there of like, oh well, yeah, they lost it. It's on them, and I get some of that to a degree, but there's also this to me, there's this moral dilemma that exists in if you were walking behind somebody, you saw them drop $100 bill out of their pocket, or they lost it. That's on them. They weren't keeping track of their stuff, right? You could easily
Mm,
quote unquote justify that, but at the end of the day, like you watched it fall out of their pocket, and you knew that happened. It's on you to like make that right. In my mind,
mm.
that
That's a really good analogy.
yeah. And so to me, that's kind of where that moral dilemma comes into play. Of like, I didn't build this equity, and I've seen you kind of lose it through the story you've told me or whatever your situation is. how can I at least in conversation, like, hey, you dropped this $100 bill. Oh man, thank you so much. Here's 50 of it. Thank you so much for at least recognizing that that was my $100. I'll split it with you, man. That was amazing. Because
Mm,
most people would have kept that. And I've done that with my wallet. I left it at a
yeah,
hotel and some lady found it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is everything in here, like all my credit cards. And I was in a
yeah,
different state. And so, so I gave her like $50. Like, thank you so much for doing what's right. And it wasn't emptied out or never found. Yeah.
yeah, no doubt. That's cool, man.
It's
Um,
it's the what would you want somebody else to do to you if you were in that situation? Like I really try to put on a
yeah,
lens of if I'm in this seller situation, what would I want somebody I'm talking with to do? Right? And that's challenging in various ways because it does
yeah,
come down to like this point of like, well, I know they got to make their money and they got to, there's money involved here. But like, this is why I like to be transparent because then they're like, yeah, okay, you're making $30,000 off this, but you're solving my solution or you're solving my problem
mm,
here. I'm okay with that. And actually, I appreciate your generosity because this other guy gave me this offer that was just ridiculous. And, um,
yeah,
and sometimes that's not even the case. Like the other guy has a higher offer, but they just appreciate that I'm willing to show the upfront. Here's what you're actually going to like. When I have the conversation, here's what you're going to make at the closing table. Can the other guy tell you that? No, because oh yeah,
yeah,
because he came back and he said, well, our contractor bid came back higher, so we got to change our offer to.
mm.
Yeah, it's just isn't clear. It
Has
comes across
has
shady.
that yeah, has that transparency with sellers, ever been an issue for you? Or have you ever, like, second guessed that or like, maybe I shouldn't" you lost deals to that?
Yeah, I've lost deals to that. I think to some degree. I did have some. I lost a sale recently, actually, uh, where they had gone with Open Door and me,
Mm,
and if anybody's familiar with Open Door, they come back and they chop you down like three different times, and it was very interesting because I almost had this split thing happening where I had one deal doing that and then another deal doing that at the exact same time, which I've never had happen. They're both going
oh,
with Open
weird.
Door,
Yeah.
and one person it ended up going fine, and Open Door ended up higher than me by like 30 grand. And then the other person at Open Door ended up like 20 grand below me. But they at least recognize like you were trying your best to give us your best offer. And that's always my goal. And I tell
Mm,
them up front, like, I will give you what I think is the best offer I can do that makes sense for me. And if you can find somebody else to do it better, awesome.
mm,
Like, because
yeah.
there's another deal down the road, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. But it sounds like it's been a net gain for you overall, and you've won
yeah,
some deals where you weren't purely winning on price, but
sure.
you mentioned and other people know this, like, sometimes people just do business with you because they like who you are, you've been transparent and honest, you've earned their trust, and so they're gonna work with you, even if you come in lower than the next investor.
Yeah.
Um, unfortunately, I'm about out of time. I have a hard stop in a little bit, and I don't want to stop our conversation, but before we wrap it up, I wanted to just give you a chance to talk about any of the mindset shifts that you've been through recently. So you mentioned that you hired or you have a coach or a mentor,
Yeah.
Robert Seifert, which we've had him on the podcast before. It's a great dude. Well, yeah. What are some of the mindset shifts you've been through recently that have helped you out?
Yeah. So in my transition as a teacher for a decade, and then we moved up north a little bit, and in that it was going to be a significant pay cut to continue to try to teach, as well as wait for an opening for a music position, right? As a music teacher, and
Mm,
those don't open very often. Um, so in that transition, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go full time investing, and had tried for a couple of years to like make it work, and it had financially been successful, but all entrepreneurs know like you were just spending so much more time now on that. And so time wise, it was kind of cutting the family time out, and that wasn't very good. So I hit this point where Robert Seifert, yeah, he had reached out and it's like, hey, I'm doing this coaching program. Are you interested? And we had talked about a year before that. And I was like, yeah, I don't think that's a good fit right now. I couldn't afford it. And then I hit this point where he had opened like this intro course, if you will. I was like, okay, I'll try that with him for like 3 months. And so we did that. And I was like, this is great. It changed my mindset, shifted a little bit. and just had complete different focus on how to make more life balance. So he's got this thing with your body, being, business, and just balancing all these various things that we
Yeah.
are all dealing with. And just going through that, I was like, okay, yeah, I need to hire a coach to help me go through this in a different way. So I hired him to kind of help me. And it's been fantastic in just seeing the growth of, you were here and now you're here. And I got to see that a lot as a teacher. And it's easy to be the guy who's like challenging you, like, you can do better, you can do this. The the coach was like, do one more rep, do another rep.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you hire them, you're like, oh, that's a lot of money to pay somebody to just tell me to do what I know I need to do. But it's that you're paying for surety and clarity and like, yeah,
Mm,
okay, this guy's been through this. He knows exactly what to do. And uh, yeah, for me, it's just a way to open up new avenues of your mindset and your thinking to just expand what you're doing in a different way.
mm. What's been the single biggest shift? Like anything you've changed as far as habits or your mindset, like a new perspective or approach to things because of that?
That's a great question. In various capacities, yes. So there's multiple challenges where like I have to meet a certain goal for my physical activity. I have to meet a certain goal for my business, my certain goal for connecting with my family, a certain goal for just various things with your own spiritual mindsets. And
Yeah.
that's just been key to really focus it down to four things. What are the four things you're going to do? One for each category,
Mm,
and really hone in on that. And how are you going to get to that? And that's just been, it, I don't know about you, but as soon as you see something like, oh, well, I could also do this Amazon thing, or I could also do this car wash, or I could also
mm,
do the laundromat thing, or
mhm.
like how else can I, all the various
Yeah.
things that we get distracted
All the
by.
shiny object syndrome. Yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
like that though. Just making really tactical bite-sized steps of like, let me do these 4 things. Because then when those shiny objects come your way, like, nope, it's not in my short list. Nope, it's not on this list. I'm not doing it.
right. Yeah, for sure.
Mm,
So that's been great. But
that's powerful, man. I might start doing that for myself. Just start listening. What am I doing? What are the small actionable things I'm doing to achieve X to kind of eliminate the distractions? I like that.
yeah, and
Well,
it's narrowed down to body, being, balance, and business, right? So those four things,
yeah.
it really shuts out. Like, is this something that's actually getting me closer to this goal? Yes or no? And if you can't answer yes, then all right, I don't need that. It just really makes things clear.
Yeah, what a great filter. What a great filter. Body, being, balance, and business. I like that, man.
Yeah.
Well, I wanna bring it to a wrap just for the sake of time. But is there anything you want to any last thoughts you want to share with the audience, or anywhere people can find you?
Yeah, no, I think the last thing I would like to do is just challenge the audience listening, really focus on like how are you giving back to people in a crummy scenario. And if you're not giving back in that scenario, like how are you giving back in various ways? Is it time? Is it mentoring somebody for free? Is it, I'm going to give to this XYZ organization, whatever it is? Like,
Mm,
there's so many ways we can be giving back. So I just challenge our listeners to go ahead and do that, give back and find a way to make it happen. Once you do it, like, oh, yeah, okay, that wasn't that bad. And oh, actually, I'm fine with the 90% I still do have, or 80% I still do have, whatever it is, right? Um,
yeah,
but yeah,
that's cool, man.
yeah. And if you want to find me, you can hit me up at Seth Bites Houses on Instagram, or Tall Guy Seth. I'm like,
Tall guys.
I'm six
I like
six,
that.
so I'm pretty tall.
Holy smokes.
You can find me on the interwebs, if you will.
Cool, man. Well, thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that. Anybody listening, if you want ideas, more ideas, ways to give to, I put together a page a while back. It's at carrot.com/give, where we featured a few of our members, different ways they're giving, how they're highlighting that through their business. And we've got some ideas there and some videos of how we've given back in the past, just to kind of spark creative juices of how you can give, just to kind of simplify it for y'all. But yeah, thanks for hopping on, Seth. It's been a good conversation. If we had more time, I'd talk all day, man.
Sure, I appreciate
Yeah.
it. It's been
Yeah.
fantastic.
Everybody listening, if there's someone you know that needs to hear this episode, if this resonated with you and there's an investor, please send it to them. Send them a link. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and I would just love to help elevate the industry as a whole. And like we take care, we're here to be a beacon of positivity and possibility. So go out and be that for someone today. And thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you later.